And welcome to the Vonu Podcast, the podcast making you invulnerable to the coercion of the state and the servile society. I'm your guest host Brian, coming to you from the Free Republic of PAZNIA, the self-liberator's paradise. As of late, from spending so much time on VonuLife and VonuLinc, we've taken up an interest in underground or semi-underground structures. First and foremost, utilizing the earth for maintaining more stable shelter temperatures is advantageous, and there are also potential security and concealment benefits. So, in this episode, we're going to review the literature available on these subjects, spanning Vonu, The Search for Personal Freedom, Vonu, Book 2, The Life of Tom Marshall, to VonuLife/VonuLinc, and probably a few others too. In future episodes in this new series, look forward to discussions, interviews, and more. This will just provide us with a nice lay of the land to build on. Puns intended. Please enjoy, and always remember, Vonu is yours for the making, and the second realm is yours for the building. Cheers.
VonuLife, November 1971. To VonuLife, dear brothers and sisters, I saw your information in the last Whole Earth catalog, and I'd like to see what ideas you have, since I've been living the same way for the last few years in Montana, Washington, and Idaho. Can't afford a subscription right now, but figured I might be able to pass on a useful idea for a warm, well-camouflaged, almost free dwelling that doesn't take a whole lot of anything but a few tools like an axe and shovel and a little hard work to put it up. I got the idea from a survival manual written by a very right-wing Christina dude named Dallas Roguemore called Get Thee to the High Mountains, from the Adobe Hacienda in Glenda, Arizona, and used a few of my own ideas to make construction easier. It's called a Shuswap Indian dwelling, and the Shuswaps are a small tribe who live in the Canadian Rockies. The only non-treaty tribe left in Canada. Got a little information from one of them I was in jail with, and I guess they're pretty nomadic now too. From all I gather, they must have some piss and vinegar behind them. The dwelling is a small dome dug into the earth with lodgepole pine for beams and saplings over that. Then I use a layer of visqueen, and over that the dirt you dug out, or adobe if you have the time and the dirt is right for it. I've built 4 now, and each one is a little different, the biggest being 18 feet diameter and 8 feet from floor to ceiling in the middle, and the smallest 12 by 6. Skylights are nice if you can get some old window, rawhide, and varnish, or even visqueen will do I guess, but it should probably be doubled. I usually find a small old barrel at the dump for a stove and flatten the top to put pots on, and run the stove pipe out the entrance hold, which I cover with a small dismountable A-frame, or dome made of willow's canvas. The A-frame is 3-sided, the 4th being canvas flap. A piece of drain pipe makes a good ventilation hole if you can find one. It's also a good idea to ditch the outside perimeter and run your visqueen all the way down, then fill the ditch with the rocks you've dug out of the hole. Usually there is more than enough. The main beams can be bolted, spiked, pegged, or lashed together, and I've always nailed the saplings to them. The ladder is simply a log with notches cut for steps in it. One person can build one for himself if he's into a solo thing, which is handy. I finished my first. After putting some large stones for steps on with the help of Claudia and Lynn, it collapsed due to excessive weight and faulty spiking. So we did it all over with 2 feet of snow on the ground, and I spent the winter in it, warm and comfortable with temperatures outside as low as 40 degrees below. We had a hot springs nearby, and it was truly a blessing for laid-back bathing. They're really easy to get strung out on, you know. I've dropped back in to help my small good-time neighborhood friends get it together, and we're doing a laminated hardwood pipe and buckskin pipe bag thing for a while, so I can be reached through Mother Earth, and will be pleased to help any of you in any way I can if you are seriously into doing one and I've missed any details. Plan to make another for my lady, and as soon as we get this cycle through with our pipe and bag thing. Jeffrey Amanda. The Wildcat from Montana.
Reply, thanks much for Shuswap dwelling info, which trades for subscription. Have you had any problem with condensation inside during summer? Outside air is warmer than ground and carries water vapor which will condense out if the air gets inside. Or do you move out in summer? Also, most wood will rot in a few years if it is wet most of the time or in contact with the earth, but this isn't a problem if a new one is built every year or so. Some friends have had condensation problem with a storage den, further underground than shoe swap dwelling, but similar I think. Have you built any in bear country? Is it bear proof? Rio.
VonuLife, May 1972. To VonuLife, Dear Rio, in answer to your questions about the shoe swaps I've been building, they have never had any serious attacks by bears. But they have been built in bear country and I've had both blacks and grizzlies around with no problems. But then I don't eat meat, or keep anything too appetizing for them to smell in the open. I've had some success making friends with a 2-year-old black who would come around every few days to visit and never cause any hassle, other than once getting into some salt I forgot to bring inside after cooking dinner outdoors one summer evening, then taking a walk. In relation to condensation, I've had some problems when I've left for a while, a week or more, but by keeping a fire going for cooking and heating in winter, it's kept it pretty dry. This is semi-arid country though, and I imagine around the coast there would be more of a problem. Jeffrey.
VonuLife, January 1972. A smile is an underground house. The word is taken from J.R. Tolkien's books, The Hobbit and the 3 volumes set The Lord of the Rings. It was a cave home used by hobbits, who were little people who ate a lot, raised gardens, and were usually very jolly. The smile was usually dug into a bank. The living room would have windows and face the garden, but the rest of the rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, storerooms, etc. opened off either side of a long hall which might have a back door at the end. An underground home is warmer in winter and cooler in summer because the temperature under a few feet of soil is almost unchanging winter and summer. It can also be damp. Since the surface of the land is left clean for growing things, it is more ecologically sound than scattering man and his junk over the surface. Greenery will clean and cool the air and deaden sound pollution, and conceal. A number of researchers say we will be living in underground shelters, at least to eat, sleep, and relax, though we will go out to work, for more than 5 years after the last bomb has fallen because of residual radiation. The small amount at that time would probably not sicken us immediately, but continued low exposure would cause leukemia and other cancers, as does overexposure to X-rays and sun now, and through gene damage cause physical and mental damage to our children. In addition, it would materially shorten our lives. It has been proven that radiation, even the small amount we get today, does shorter our lives now. This is done, it is surmised, by knocking part, the reconstruction memory, off the cell's DNA chain. This results in replacement of failing cells with less than original quality replacement parts. In any case, one can live quite comfortably in the hottest desert land in a smile. The desert cools rapidly when the sun's direct rays are gone and will not heat up until the middle of the next morning. In the heat of the day, the modern hobbit would stay in his smile. The smile, because of its construction and location, one is comparatively safe against fire, flood, windstorm, fallout. It should have 10 feet of soil between it and the surface, vandalism, and thieves. If found by thieves, and this is not too easy since nothing shows as in an above-ground home, it may be robbed, but it cannot be easily burnt nor torn up. It is also a less obvious tax object. The smile may be built of many materials. Commercially built, and you wouldn't believe how popular this type of home is becoming, it could cost $375,000 or more. It can have an underground swimming pool and greenhouse. But a smile can be built for a few hundred, or much less if you are a good scrounger. Labor is the big thing, and none of it is too technical. The preferred material is reinforced concrete. Commercial concrete sewer pipe can be bought, damaged. It is very cheap, in diameters of 1 foot to 18 or more. It is generally as long as it is wide. A 4-foot diameter x4 length piece can be used for tunnels or storerooms or closets. A 10-foot can be used as a room with a wood floor part way up and the under space used as storage. Half an 18-foot can be a room 9 high at the center and 18 feet by 18 feet. If you preferred to make your own, forms could be constructed of bent pipes lined with 1/4 inch plywood. Set a larger form over a smaller and fill the space with stones, wire cloth, and iron bars and wet it all down and pour in cement. When it sets, remove the forms. Any design could be used: one level, split level, multi-level. The limits of the imagination are the only limits. Concrete pipe can be used for tunneling by digging in 2 foot and placing a 4 diameter pipe in the hole. Continue digging and using a bar to level the pipe further into the hole as you dig so no more than 2 foot of tunnel is unguarded. The hole should be just slightly bigger than the OD of the pipe. When the first pipe is all the way into the hole, set a second, etc., and keep them not more than a foot or 2 apart, so a cave-in wouldn't cover you. This must be done in fairly solid soil or it will fail prematurely and you'll have a problem moving your pipes. Probably the dry season is best. The earth should be packed into the spaces around the pipes as you finish fill. The pipes could also be tarred on the outside. Construction could also be standard mine timbering and shoring, or of 2x4 or 4x4 or even 1x, with plywood or corrugated plastic sheet fastened to the outside and plastic, 6mm, sheet could be draped over the outside of all. Or a hole could be dug, the smile built, and dirt dumped back over. A covering of plastic sheet over all would eliminate leaks and help keep all dry. The floor may be planked, or concrete, or clean gravel. Shelves, etc. can be built against that besides or attached with dowels in drilled holes, power-inserted mounts or modern glues. Everything possible should be stainless, rust and rot proof, etc., as they should be in any case for durability and long-lasting. A heavily filtered pipe can lead to the inmost room or rooms, the intake in the front room and powered by a low-current DC fan operated by an auto battery. This can be constantly recharged by a solar cell arrangement or an auto generator powered by a small propeller mounted on a pole. It must be waterproofed and governed. Most any appliance can be worked the same way. A line in the sky is a dead giveaway. You can use butane lamps with a trailer tank for several months' supply or use kerosene lamps. The Aladdin lamp is much better than the old-fashioned type, and Tilly in England makes a very good pressure Caro lamp, much better than the American models like Coleman. A swimming tank 5 foot wide, 50 long and 5 deep in the center can be made of concrete if you must have one, or even of draped plastic sheet. Use your imagination and your muscle in place of the cash you don't have. Whatever type of shoring you use, never dig under an unsupported roof. It could collapse and bury you. Use temporary, oversized sawhorses and sheets of heavy plywood or 2-inch boards over you if nothing else, then take them apart and use in building later. Plant things above the cave to stabilize the soil. The roots will help tie it together. Narrow tunnels are safer than wide. Radiation moves only in a straight line, so a right angle turn in 10 foot of soil will stop it. A good book on mining and shoring is von Bernwitz's. A heavy pipe, preferably bent in a half-circle, frame can also be used with 3/8 plywood, 1, 2, or 3 layers, or 1-inch board bolted to pipe and covered with plastic sheet can be used. Also, cut trees should be free, or scrap wood or old railroad ties sell cheap, but remember, 10 foot of dirt is heavy. Storage can be in smaller sewer tile. Put saran wrap around flared end and fill 2-inch of cement, with a dowel or nylon rope handle, to form a lid. Turn pipe over and fill another end 2-inch cement for bottom. Bury, fill with food and plastic bags, maybe dry ice or wet carbide for inert atmosphere, put on lid, maybe thin rubber as sealer, lay plastic sheet over and find. Remember where you put it. Or mold handholds into lid cement. A small hand-type pipe bender can be rented. A couple pipes together could store long handle too. Teepee style, Triangular shoring could even be used to give a upside-down V-tunnel. Lexan, illegible plastic glass is 250x tougher than glass and will stop a .45 bullet, so it could be fine for smile windows. From Paul Dorr, Pioneer.
VonuLife, August 1972. Excerpt from Report on Progress and Problems by Rio. Shelter development is still our biggest activity. Our situation the past year: Vonu, comfort, convenience. Winter, we can have any three of the four but not all four at once, i.e., we can live in Vonu in comfort with convenience but not in winter. We can be comfortable in Vonu during winter if we forego convenience to do many things, etc. We are still living most of the time in polyethylene A tents, part of the time in our van. Our A tent survived the winter with one minor mishap. There was an exceptionally heavy snow while we were away. Snow slid down the poly and piled up at the bottom on each side, bowing in the sides and dragging down the ridge rope. The poly was punctured in a few places by sharp-cornered objects under it but didn't tear, nor did the polypropylene ridge rope, 1,200-pound test, break. Other problems with the simple A tent: cold and cold weather, no insect screening of tent as a whole, we use mosquito bar over bed only, no blackout of tent as a whole, again, we use curtain over bed, reflections from sides which slope south, east or west visible for several hundred yards, fastening of sides must be changed whenever weather changes from wet/cool to hot or back, frequently during spring and autumn. Clear poly has a short life in daylight. Our poly tent has held up almost a year now, but little direct sunlight strikes it. We tinted it near the ridge with cheap spray paints for possible ultraviolet protection and for better blending with the surroundings. The paint rubs off easily, but this isn't a problem so long as the tent doesn't move much. The paint appears much lighter on the poly than on the top of the can, so dark shades should be purchased. Our lay foam hut has proven very satisfactory for tasks which can be accomplished in a reclining position, such as sleeping, reading, eating, erotics. We slept in it from October through May. With 2 people inside, temperature rise over outside was about 35 degrees Fahrenheit, about 6 inches above the floor. During warm weather the door was left open, covered only with netting. The 2-inch thick open-cell polyurethane foam, commonly sold for mattresses, breathed well. Even on the wettest days the inside stayed dry, though beads of moisture condensed and kept evaporating on the outside. This was with 2 of us breathing inside with all vents closed. The foam hut was inside the poly tent which sheltered it from rain. At first we laid the foam hut directly on the plastic ground cloth, but, apparently, moisture diffusing through the bottom condensed on the plastic and caused puddles and low spots. Then we built a foundation of boughs a few inches above the ground and ground cloth, which solved that problem. No stiffness was noticed inside. A vent plug, about 6 inches in diameter, was removed from the top when we used a kerosene lamp inside. The lamp was placed under the vent. Ordinary foam is very inflammable, so care is required around fire. We replaced the internal brace, to prevent sagging, with cords to overhead runner ropes which also held up the blackout trap. The foam sit hut is not yet satisfactory. Temperature rise was only 15 degrees Fahrenheit over outside, 1 person, not enough for work requiring bare hands on cold days. Temperature rise was no greater than in lay hut, also 15 degrees with 1 person, even though dimensions were smaller, 4 by 6 by 2 feet versus 4.5 x 9 by 2 feet, probably because there wasn't a tight fitting at the waist. I had hoped that the warmed air, being lighter, would remain trapped within the hut, but apparently there was much convection. Either a snug waist closure or a bottom will be needed for greater warmth. Already it is difficult to get into or out of, and to pull additional things inside. A tight closure or bottom will increase difficulties. Foam is an easy and forgiving material to work with. A piece not quite the right size can be compressed or stretched into place. A miscut piece can be glued back together. A join with the proper foam cement is as strong as the foam. Foam is fairly expensive though. Our lay hut consumed over $50 worth. In winter/spring 1971 we built a small den, intending to use it for a workshop and storage. First problem was condensation. In summer, warm air trickles in and cools, relative humidity rises past 100%, and dew condenses on everything exposed. Last autumn I put in a fix, I hoped, and left it alone for the winter. I have yet to learn if the condensation problem is solved because last winter it flooded. The den almost filled with water, the things stored in it washed around some and got wet. For drainage there was a 4-inch pipe topped by a 1-foot cross-section of rocks, covered with plastic to keep finer dirt out. This gives an idea of the flow of water. The water apparently welled up from the bottom. The structure was intact except for some washing near the entranceway. I opened up entrances to the drain some more in case clogging was the problem. Next spring I will visit it again and see if the problem is solved. But, for now anyway, I'm turned off to completely underground structures too big to be assembled away from sight, watertight, and packed in, i.e., much larger than a 55-gallon drum. Not only are condensation and drainage likely problems, but much equipment is needed to make a den livable, artificial light and ventilation at least. And the basic structure must be strong to withstand soil pressure/weight. This results in the structure being heavy. This, in turn, requires that the structure be built mostly of native materials. Prefabricated sections would be too heavy to backpack very far, no point having a den if there is a conspicuous vehicle trail leading to it. Volume of our den is about 400 cubic feet. Construction time of basic structure was about 400 person-hours. Materials cost less than $100, mostly plastic film, cord, pins, nails with heads clipped off, drain pipe, and plywood and glue for entrance. Most time-consuming was not digging but preparing timbers, scouting trees which could be removed without altering the appearance of the environment, cutting, trimming, transporting, smoothing or debarking, drilling holes for pins. This was all done with hand tools. The only power tools which would have saved significant time would have been a drill/sander. I now believe our first den was over-designed with respect to Vonu, considering the remote and rugged area in which it is located. I would guess the mean time to discovery, MTD, under present conditions as 2,000 years. An MTD of 2,000 means that if I had 2,000 such dens, I would expect about one per year to be discovered by somebody. We are now working on 2 types of shelter. The first we call a P.A.Z.NIA. That name has no particular significance. It is semi-underground, like the shoe swap but of different form to provide more light and, hopefully, remain dry in wet climate. After the problems with the den, I am proceeding cautiously. I am only building the basic structure this summer and autumn. If that stands up to winter rains, snows and winds, we intend to complete it and move it in early spring, hopefully early enough to check its insulative qualities. The interior will be insulated from outside air but not from the ground, thus using the ground as a heat source during winter and as a heat sink during summer. Ground temperature a few feet down remains about 55 degrees Fahrenheit during the year around in most areas of this region. I expect the inside will remain about 50 degrees Fahrenheit on all but the coldest days. Our objective is to be able to perform all kinds of work in comfort without an artificial heat source. I'm designing for 50 years MTD. The second type of shelter is an improved poly tent. Unlike the P.A.Z.NIA, it is for warm weather use only. It is simpler and easier to construct than the P.A.Z.NIA.
VonuLife, March 1973. A Hidden Home, The Shoe Swap Dwelling. By Jeffrey. Here is a way to build a warm, well-camouflaged, almost free dwelling that doesn't take a whole lot of anything but a few tools like an axe and shovel and a little hard work to put it up. I got the idea from a survival manual written by a very right-wing Christian dude named Dallas Rockmore called Get 3 to the High Mountains and used a few of my own ideas to make construction easier. It's called the Shuswap Indian Dwelling, and the Shuswaps are a small tribe who live in the Canadian Rockies, the only non-treaty tribe left in Canada. Got a little information from one of them I was in jail with, and I guess they're pretty nomadic now too. From all I gather, they must have some piss and vinegar behind them. The dwelling is a small dome dug into the earth with lodgepole pine for beams and saplings over that. Then I use a layer of visqueen, polyethylene film, and over that the dirt dug out, or adobe if you have the time for it, and the dirt is right for it. I built 4 now, and each one is a little different. The biggest is 18 feet diameter and 8 feet from floor to ceiling in the middle, and the smallest 12 by 6. Skylights are nice if you can get some old window, rawhide and varnish, or even visqueen will do I guess, but it should probably be doubled. I usually find a small, old barrel at the dump for a stove and flatten the top to put pots on, and run the stove pipe out the entrance hole, which I cover with a small dismountable A-frame, or dome made of willows and canvas. The A-frame is 3-sided, the 4th being a canvas flap. A piece of drain pipe makes a good ventilation hole. It's a good idea to ditch the outside perimeter and run the visqueen all the way down, then fill the ditch with rocks you've dug out of the hole. Usually there is more than enough. The main beams can be bolted, spiked, pegged, or lashed together. I've always nailed the saplings to them. The ladder is simply a log with notches out for steps. I've had some problems with condensation when I've left for a week or more, but keeping a fire going for cooking and heating in winter has kept it pretty dry. This is in semi-arid country though, and I imagine around the coast there would be more of a problem. The shoeswaps I've been building have never had any serious attacks by bears, and they have been built in bear country, both blacks and grizzlies. But then I don't eat meat or keep anything too appetizing for them to smell in the open. One person can build one for himself if he's into a solo thing, which is handy. I built my first with the help of Claudia and Lynn. After putting some large stones for steps on, it collapsed due to excessive weight and faulty spiking. So we did it all over with 2 feet of snow on the ground, and I spent the winter in it, warm and comfortable with temperatures as low as 40 degrees below. We had a hot spring nearby, and it was truly a blessing for laid-back bathing.
VonuLife, March 1973. Excerpt from How to Build and Design with Natural Timbers by Rio. This article is based on my experiences over a 3-year period building one completely underground smile, one semi-underground structure, several bed frames, and bracing for plastic tents. My practices are still changing. I have much to learn. However, I have seen little in print relevant to this kind of construction, so I offer these tentative suggestions. Where TOUs, Vonu construction with natural timbers is slower than dimensioned, commercial, lumber. I use trees only at sites remote from roads. If a 4-wheel vehicle can be driven to a site, I would use 1 or more vans or campers for shelter. If a 4-wheel vehicle can be driven to within a quarter mile, I would use mostly salvaged lumber or other processed materials. Or I might prefab a structure in small sections away from the site, backpack to the site, and assemble it there. I make these choices not only for economy, money, and time, but to minimize activities near a site likely to draw attention to the area. What TO build? A conventional log cabin requires large quantities of wood. This was seldom a problem for European immigrants a century ago because home sites were usually on land where trees were plentiful. Trees had to be cut anyway to clear land for crops. Trees were all cut close to the site and didn't have to be moved far. Homesteads were not concealed, nor would concealment have been possible with traditional farming, stock raising, logging, or mining. But even a century ago, a log cabin was a brute force solution. It not only consumed many trees, but provided poor insulation. A fire was needed in winter for warmth. And if one moved, the cabin had to be left. The Indians, more sophisticated in working with native materials, built structures which used fewer and smaller trees. For a Vonu dwelling, a log cabin is usually unsuitable. The site is often on steep and rocky terrain where trees grow small. Trees must be cut sparingly over a wide area so as to not significantly alter the environment, and so timbers must be backpacked through brush and over rough ground. A vehicle trail or even mule trail would defeat the purpose. Use of a power saw or axe is undesirable because of noise. Then too, a Vonuan can use materials which did not exist a century ago, such as polyethylene and synthetic cord. In my projects to date, the most time-consuming tasks have been timber preparation, including finding removable trees, cutting, trimming, debarking, disposing of unusable parts, and carrying to site. Even when building completely underground, I spent more time preparing timbers than I did digging and filling rocky soil. So I use natural timbers sparingly, for main beams and posts where there are bending or compressive loads, usually not for bracing, surfacing, or shelving. And I design for use of pieces light enough to carry easily, rarely over 100 pounds. At present, I do not recommend any particular design. What is best will depend on the environment: rain, snow, drainage, temperatures, shade, slope, soil, materials available, trees, brush, rocks, soil, leaves, size, covered space, warmed space, headroom, and degree of Vonu desired. And it is to VonuLinc's advantage to use a variety of shapes and locate in various kinds of terrain, so that hostiles do not know what to look for. One good source for ideas are the dwellings of primitive peoples such as the Shuswap, preceding article. Look through books on native peoples in a large library. Use such designs for starting points for your own creating. Primitive people did not have, on one hand, strong waterproof plastics available for a penny or two a square foot, nor, on the other hand, airborne snoops to contend with. Vonu construction seems to have little in common with conventional building, so experience in the building trades is not especially helpful. For a first structure, I suggest something that is small, mostly above ground, not especially remote, but at least 400 yards from the nearest vehicle trail, and very well hidden. The latter is important since one will want to quickly weed out forms difficult to conceal. A first structure might be a sleeping hut for one person, which is also a scale model of a possible larger shelter. One should build their own shelter and do so out of natural materials only if he is willing and able to experiment, i.e., can survive a failure or two. Preparing timbers, for Vonu and conservation, which usually go together, I cut only dead or dying trees. If dead, I choose trees which have been dead long enough for bark to be easily peeled off, yet with most of the wood sound, not rotted or eaten away by insects. But for the crucial parts, main beams and posts, I prefer trees which still show a few green needles. I look for trees which are being crowded out, such as one or two of the smaller trees within a clump which are overtopped by their neighbors and are green only on the uppermost branches. I prefer conifers, example, pines, Douglas fir. I do not take isolated trees regardless of condition. If I expect to use the shelter more than a few years, I remove bark. With live trees, this is easiest if the trees are cut in spring and debarked as soon as they are cut. I use a bow saw for main cuts and a small crosscut saw for removing branches. I saw each tree off flush with the ground to minimize stump, and cover the stump with rocks or leaves. Any parts one am not able to use I dispose of under thick bushes. I allow live wood to dry, preferably for several months before using. I stack loosely under a rain/shade shelter. Fast drying in the sun may increase splitting. The wood of a few trees, redwood, giant arborvitae, are naturally resistant to decay. Other woods must be treated with a preservative if they are to last more than a few years, if used underground, in contact with the ground, or frequently damp. I have used preservative paint containing pentachlorophenol. There are many brands, sold in most building supply stores. The paint dries to a hard finish and is then supposedly non-toxic to touch. Creosote, which is often used for wharves and telephone poles, is cheaper but always sticky and smelly. Fastening, nailing is difficult with natural timbers. A stout nail often splits the wood. A slender nail usually bends. If I use nails, I first drill a hole slightly smaller in diameter than the nail. Gluing wood to wood doesn't hold well because of absence of flat surfaces. Binding with fiberglass tape and then epoxying might work. I haven't tried it. I do most fastening by lashing with cord. I use mostly polypropylene, which stretches less and supposedly weathers less than nylon. I do not use manila or cotton because they quickly rot in a wet climate. I find woven rope easier to work with and usually less expensive than twisted. March 25, 1973, letter and pack script. At present our overall lifestyle is a blend of van nomadism, troglydysm and smumism, and is moving toward the latter too. Troglydysm equals living physically underground, smumism equals moving between several homes hidden in the wilderness. Except for one smile we are still experimenting with, we will not be building more completely underground structures in the near future. Our present shelter work is mostly with small, well-concealed structures on the surface and partly underground. The shift in our interest is due not only to the problems with underground shelters, especially drainage/condensation, but to growing confidence and inability at concealment on the surface. While it is conceivable that Big Brother may eventually have surveillance systems capable of identifying almost any human habitation on the surface, I don't think this will be a serious threat during the next 20 to 30 years. We built the basic structure for a semi-underground home/shop last summer. If it overwinters well, we will complete the interior and move in this spring.
VonuLife, May 1973. Have I built any smeals? No. I'm a cave crawler. Saw my photo article in Explorer's Journal. And have lived in ex-gold mine bashed out of solid rock in a mountainside. Constant trips. One in sandstone was not. Have a solid type. Living in caves/shafts where bits of roof fall regularly is a nervous life. So can crawling in them be. I have dug and built some underground root cellars, which are smeals, I suppose, though they aren't usually lived in. Storm cellars, cyclone shelters, and spring houses are a sort of smeal. Some are reasonably comfortable if fixed up. I've dug and timbered horizontal mine shafts in dry places. Many desert mines are perfectly good smeals and a big lot cooler than the open desert. Some desert peoples in the Sahara, etc., live underground and have veritable cities underground. Even one people in North Africa today put large systems of passages, etc., underground. It's sometimes 60 degrees cooler than on the top. Also many have water, from condensation, underground streams and veins. I think, if I built a big smeal, I'd find problems I hadn't anticipated. Laws in some places, money costs, others depending on location.
VonuLife, May 1974, excerpt from letter. Also near here is a retired college teacher lady, in an underground concrete dome she built. She found and finished a round hilltop to a flattened dome shape, dug drainage around it, and laid reinforcing rod over it. She pouted and tamped concrete over this. When it set, she dug out under it and put in a slab floor, and covered over the top with earth and planted grass and bushes. Only one side is cut for exposure, having several windows and a door. A room further back in the underground has a root cellar function.
From Living Free, January 2012. Troglydysm Reconsidered, Living Free, January 2012. By Jim Stum. After living for several years in a camper mounted on a truck, and sometimes under a sheet of plastic in the woods, Rio, Tom Marshall, decided it would be better to live physically underground in a den he would build hidden in the wilderness. He probably thought that there would be a learning curve, but after a while he would find out all that he needed to know to make this a satisfactory way of living. But problems with water, both flooding and condensation, disrupted his plans. I will first recall what Rio himself wrote about these problems, then I will add some comments of my own on the general idea of troglydysm. All of these quotations below appeared in the life of Tom Marshall, LTM. In a letter dated February 1970, Rio wrote,
After much study and evaluation, my freemate and I have largely decided on a mix of troglydysm, underground, and pedestrian nomadism as a fully liberated, no compromises, lifestyle, into which we will evolve. LTM page 9.
This was made more widely known in the March 1970 issue of Preform, where he wrote,
PI is now for nomads and troglodytes. Troglodyte or trog means, to us, someone achieving freedom through underground concealment. Soon we will build a hidden chamber beneath public land for storage and emergency shelter. LTM page 9.
He began digging this first hidden chamber in Los Padres National Forest in Ventura County in Southern California, but he was discovered by forest rangers looking for a lost boy, and was forced to abandon this venture. LTM page 9. So he moved north to Southern Oregon and started over, as he said in Preform number 9 May 70, page 12, we will now begin work on a home/workshop, by which he meant an underground den. Later in Preform, he reported on his progress. November 70 Preform. I live in the tent back in the wilderness building our den that I hope to have the basic structure done by January 1, 1971,
then we head south. LTM page 11. But problems developed with this den. In September 1972, Ryo wrote,
In winter/spring, 1970/1971, we built a small den, intending to use it for a workshop and storage. First problem was condensation. Warm, moist, summer air cools and dew condenses on everything exposed. Last autumn, 1971, I put in a fix, I hoped, and left it alone for the winter. I have yet to learn if the condensation problem is solved because last winter, 1971-72, it flooded. The den almost filled with water. Things stored in it washed around some and got wet. There was a 4-inch pipe for drainage apparently overwhelmed by water welling up from the bottom. I opened the entrances to the drain some more. Next spring, 1973, I'll visit again and see if the problem is solved. But for now I'm turned off to completely underground structures much larger than a 55-gallon drum. The volume of our den is about 400 cubic feet. Construction time of the basic structure was about 400 person-hours. Most time consuming was not digging but preparing timbers. I now believe our first den was over-designed with respect to Vonu. We are now working on a new type of shelter we call a PAZNIA. Name has no special significance. It is semi-underground like the shoe swap, but of a different form to provide more light and, hopefully, remain dry in this wet climate. After the problems with the den, I am proceeding cautiously, building the basic structure this summer and autumn, 1972. If that stands up to winter weather, 1972-73, we intend to complete it and move in early spring, 1973. LTM page 19. September 1972, our lifestyle this autumn. We sleep in the lay foam hut under a small poly tent. During spells of good weather, I go for several days at a time to the PAZNIA on which I am still working. We expect to move to the PAZNIA in February or March, 1973, if structure and drainage prove out. LTM page 18. March 1973, except for one smile, we are still experimenting with. We will not be building more completely underground structures in the near future. Problems with underground structures, especially drainage and condensation. We built the basic structure for a semi-underground home/shop last spring/summer, 1972. If it overwinters well, we will complete the interior and move in this spring, 1973. LTM page 23.
Editor's comments. We don't know if Ryo ever lived in his Smile underground den. He never wrote about living in it. Most likely he would have said, "We are now living in our Smile," if that had been the case. But this is only speculation. The only time he would have been living in it would have been during 1971, because it flooded during the winter at the end of that year, and he certainly never lived in it after that. I visited him in September 1971 and met with him twice in 2 different locations. At both sites, he was living in his camper. I didn't ask him about the state of his Smile when we met. I didn't want to look like I was pumping him for information. And he didn't bring it up on his own. When he wrote about how he was living, it was always either in the camper, or under a plastic tent in the woods. As for their second structure, the one that he calls a PAZNIA, as of March 1973 he was still working on it and planning to move into it at some future time. After that, his letters became fewer and shorter and he never mentioned living in his PAZNIA. And then he changed his mailing address to a post office box near Berkeley, which might indicate that he had moved out of the Siskiyou region entirely. Change of address. In a letter dated November 1972, Ryo indicated that he might move out of the Siskiyou region, or even give up living in the woods entirely. He says,
Actually, Roberta and I are not as committed to wilderness Vonu, at least to the exclusion of everything else, as we might seem. We go through a period of doubts/rethink each winter. If it were not for the nuclear threat, we might be trying to build a Smile under St. Monica Mountains or maybe Tilden Park, Berkeley. At the moment, Roberta is more sold on wilderness Vonu than I. We look upon ourselves as Vonu experimentalists. LTM page 18.
Then, in March 1972, 4 months later, Ryo published PAC number 1, which gave his address as a P.O. box in Berkeley. In a June 1973 letter, he said,
"All our mail should now go to Berkeley." LTM page 24, and again in September 1973, Berkeley address is still good. LTM page 25.
Does this indicate that he had relocated to somewhere or near Berkeley? He sent only one more letter after this one in September 1973, and in that one, in February 1974, he didn't say whether he had moved. After that, he fell silent, so we don't know. Editor's comments. 1. Flooding. As Ryo discovered, water creates two problems for the would-be troglodyte: flooding and condensation. Flooding refers to water that dribbles in through the top of the underground structure, or seeps in through the walls, or wells up from the floor. The solution to flooding is to choose a dry location for your underground den. Since water runs downhill, the driest location is likely to be at the top of a hill. But since the trog's reason for digging a den is concealment, the top of a hill is the worst place for it if you want to stay hidden. The best place for concealment is in a depression at the bottom of hills, but that's the worst location for flooding. A compromise might be on the side of a hill, near the top, but not right on top. In any case, you need to watch your prospective building site for a while before you begin construction, in rainy as well as dry weather, to see how water runs in that area. Compounding the problem is that flooding is likely to be seasonal, worse in the wet season for that area, which may be in winter or spring. A site that looks dry in late summer might be very soggy in spring when the snow melts. Once you've picked a dry site, the design to combat flooding should include a top of the den at ground level that is made so it's watertight when closed, trenches around the top to lead surface water around the top of the den rather than across the top, and a drain inside with a pipe running downhill and opening to the outside somewhere below the level of the floor of the den. A drain opening to outside should have a screen to prevent small animals and bugs getting inside. It should also be concealed behind some plants so that it won't appear to be artificial and give away the location of the den. With these precautions, flooding is a problem that perhaps can be solved. But a major concern is that you may get it wrong and pick a site that's not as dry as you thought. You may put in hundreds of hours of labor to build the den, only to find out that it does flood, perhaps only in the wet season. A den can't be moved, so if it turns out to be unusable, you may have to abandon it, which means you lose the value of all the work you've put into it. 2. Condensation. This is a more difficult problem than flooding. Condensation is strictly a summer problem, not an issue in winter. In summer in many places the air is often hot and moist. Hot air can hold more moisture than cold air can. The walls and floor of any underground place tends to stay near the annual average temperature for that geographic location, often around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. When the warm, moist air from outside gets into the underground den, the air is cooled by contact with the cooler inside surfaces. The cooled air can't hold as much moisture, so water condenses out on all the cooler inside surfaces. There may be so much condensation that water drips off the ceiling. So the inside of the den in summer will tend to get clammy and damp, and everything kept inside will get wet and eventually moldy. Summer condensation is often a problem in basements of regular houses. There the solution is to install a dehumidifier. This is basically a refrigeration unit that uses electricity to cool coils that air is blown over. Water condenses on these coils and is collected in a pant that needs to be emptied. In that way, the excess moisture is taken out of the air. As much as possible, you also want to keep such a space closed off from the outside in order to minimize the amount of fresh, moist air that gets in, bringing more moisture with it. But if you're building an underground den in the wilderness, the dehumidifier solution would not be available because you would very likely have little or no electricity to power the device. Like any refrigeration unit, a dehumidifier uses a large amount of electricity. It's not something you can run on a small amount of battery power. Adding a tight seal to the door in order to keep the warm, moist air out would help. A double-door airlock would be even better. But you can't seal the den completely because you have to have air to breathe. With the door sealed whenever it's closed, you might ventilate the den using a ground pipe. The idea is to draw warm, moist air into the downhill end of a sloping pipe that runs underground. this pipe would be cooled by the ground. Moisture in the air would condense in the pipe and run downhill away from the den. By the time the air reaches the den, much of the moisture would have already condensed in the pipe, leaving the air drier. Perhaps the same pipe that is used to drain away floodwater could be used in summer for this kind of ground pipe ventilation. You would need to have a fan to draw in the air and exhaust it out of the top of the den. This would use some electricity, but not as much as a dehumidifier. But none of these solutions are really satisfactory, as they involve considerable construction to achieve only partial improvements. Ryo said that he put in a fix for his condensation problem, but he didn't say what he did. Perhaps he sealed the doorway tight. He never found out if this fix worked because his den flooded. 3. Plyno/shoe swap. The last structure Ryo was working on was half underground, half above ground. He called it a plyno and said it was something like the Indian shoe swap described in VonuLife 4, page 2, but he never published any further description or plans for what he was building. It seems to me this half and half is no solution at all. The half that's underground will still have the same problems with water, flooding and condensation. The half that's above ground will be visible to any strangers who happen to come near enough. If he was confident enough that he had chosen a building site that no one would ever see, he could just as well have built a low cabin that was entirely above ground, and that would have eliminated the water problems completely. For arid desert, perhaps an entirely underground structure, Smile, would not suffer from these water problems if it was built in an arid desert. If the air is really dry, there might be no condensation. But even in deserts, there are occasional flash floods, rare, but they do happen. In general, Ryo's experience was in one area, the Northwest, which has rainy winters. His experience may not be relevant at some other location with a different climate. 5. Seasonal. It might be feasible to use a completely underground, hidden Smile as winter quarters only. Empty it out and leave it during the summer when it's practical to camp out, perhaps living under a sheet of plastic in the woods as Ryo did. Living underground like this in winter, one might make a fire at night. As long as it's warmer inside than it is outside, there will be no condensation. Flooding would still be a concern, but good site selection would minimize that risk. In a location with a colder climate, there might be mostly snow rather than rain in winter. Here in western New York, the air remains below freezing much of the winter, so there is not much risk of flooding in that season. But you would want to get out of an underground den before the spring thaw releases all the water that has been locked up all winter as snow and ice. But another concern is, if you build an underground den in a place where there's snow and ice and the ground freezes, you wouldn't want your door flat on the ground. A door like that would freeze and would be buried under the snow, trapping you inside. Instead, you would need a vertical door, preferably set back in an alcove or cave. Designing something like that would be hidden and not appear to be a door, would be a challenge. 6. RV is better. I think living in an RV was probably Ryo's best idea. It gave him mobility with no big investment in one place. So if he had trouble with the bludge, he could just drive away to someplace else, taking all his stuff with him, or leaving it hidden in secret stashes until he could retrieve it. But he grew dissatisfied with the legal requirements of a motor vehicle, having to keep up his registration, his vehicle insurance, and his driver's license. He wanted to cut himself loose from even that much interaction with government. And he thought that living physically underground, hidden in the wilderness, Troglydysm, would make him completely free from oppressive authorities. He knew that changing to this new lifestyle would involve some transition problems like the ones he had experienced when he moved out of his house and into his RV full-time. He thought that becoming Trog would be somewhat similar. But it turned out that the problems of condensation and flooding could not be managed by someone living low-cost, low-tech, hidden in the wilderness. Someone living in town can cope with moderate flooding with a sump pump or two, and condensation with a dehumidifier. But both of these use a lot of electricity that would not be available to someone living in the wilderness. A few batteries won't do it, and generating your own power, e.g. solar panels, windmill, hydroelectric, would be almost impossible to keep hidden. So becoming Trog was really a step too far. The RV lifestyle was really as far as it was feasible to go, even though it did mean having to put up with some minimal contact with government.
And there you have it, basically the entirety that has been written on the subject of troglydysm, or the construction of underground/semi-underground shelters, at least in these Vonu and libertarian zines that we have access to. If we come across anything else, we'll be sure to release it, but for now, more preparation will be put into a more substantial series, sometime in the future. But damn, I definitely do appreciate Jim Stum's candidness at the end. Certainly worth considering, but then again, a high-tech lifestyle in the wilderness could be possible now, or in the near future. Please make sure to check out the Free Republic of PAZNIA, a parallel network currently being built. As of now, the vetted map and directory is out for vetted self-liberators. PAZNIA list, the Craigslist of the Second Realm is live. Make your own post today, or check out the listings already there. And of course, come see us in the Second Realm for one of our freedom gatherings. For the full list of events, visit paznia.com/vonufist. For help getting vetted, email Rayo2, coordinator@paznia.com. That's all we have for you today. Thanks for your time, wishing you a joyous and liberated day from the Free Republic. Cheers.
Liberty Under Attack Publications is your source for all things self-liberation. Featuring high-quality agorist and anarchist fiction, Paul Rosenberg's A Lodging of Wayfaring Men, and his The Breaking Dawn are two great starts. The Brushfire series by Matthew Wojtecki is stellar, #Agora, and more. Save Bitcoin or fiat by buying a bundle, such as the Strategy Sample Pack, wherein you can explore a few different strategies to the problem of freedom, at Current, Vonu, Ben Stone's Vision, and Second Realm, book on strategy. And once you're inspired to take action in your own life, head on over to the Ghost Pads and Privacy Tools tab to get yourself a Ghost Phone and Ghost Pad, and secure your communications from both the public and private spies. Stock up your home apothecary with items from Aura's Apothecary, Black Drawing Salve, Comfrey Salve, Natural Insect Repellent, and much more. And finally, the newest edition, PAZNIA Farms Canned Goods, Cowboy Candy, Pickles, Salsa, etc. Of course, all of the canned goods and the apothecary items are made with the highest quality ingredients, some grown here at the homestead. Head on over to libertyunderattack.com, again libertyunderattack.com, to check out our full catalog or to place your order today. Bitcoin accepted and preferred. Email if you'd like to pay with XMR, shane@libertyunderattack.com, or if you'd like to place an international order. Again, libertyunderattack.com. Liberty Under Attack Publications, share your story, find your freedom.